Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Spectrum, Every Age, Every Need. I am your host, Shawn Francis, and today we're going to be talking about um, AB 126, which is the bill put into legislation by the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, which has earmarked $2.4 billion for special education. On one hand, it's everywhere, and on the other hand, I don't seem to um, see too much conversation taking place about it. But there's a lot of questions that I had, did a little bit of research, and wanted to share that here with you today on another episode of Beyond the Spectrum. Okay, before we get started, we want to make sure that we acknowledge and give thanks to our community partners. The first of which is Billy Footwear. Billy Footwear, they're a company that make adaptive footwear for all. The story of the founder, Billy Price, is one that is amazing and inspiring. His first week in college, Billy suffered a catastrophic accident that left him paralyzed, and he had to learn how to do everything all over again for himself, which he was able to do with the exception of putting shoes on his feet. Prototype was made, and Billy Footwear was born, and they have served many and sold over 1 million pair of shoes. If you click on the show notes, you can get a discount of 10% off your final purchase, and that includes any sale items that they may have taking place, which they usually do at the end of the year and then towards the end of the summer as well. Our next community partner we'd like to give thanks to and acknowledge is Soul Grain Granola. Soul Grain is a different company. It's minority owned by two women that are friends of the show, Sylvia and Lisa. And they, unlike most food items that are in the marketplace that have artificial ingredients and things of that nature, they have no artificial ingredients at all, and they have delicious flavors. And the most recent one, which they've just come out with, is lemon tart. They have other flavors like, um, oh my gosh, there's a sweet potato, there's a mango, just a variety of different things. If you click on the show notes, you'll get 10% off your final purchase, or you can use the code BTS10. That is BTS10. And anything that matters to anyone is twice as important to those of us that are caregivers, and nutrition is no exception. So make sure you check out Soul Green. And then our newest community partner is Meet Bee. That is MEETBEA. That is Meet Bee is a app and service that is designed to bridge the gap between support and independence. And so the way that it works is there's a subscription that you will pay, and you have stakeholders that are all involved to help with goal setting. Whether you're talking about someone that has a chemical dependency, someone that is neurodivergent and simply trying to get from point A to point B, the stakeholders usually involve caregivers and parents, therapists, and things of that sort, and you can all track the progress that your loved one is making in order to get from point A to point B, and hopefully achieve some level of complete independence at some point. And if you click on the link in the show notes, you will get 10% off of your initial subscription. And the last thing I want to do is just encourage you, if you are a male who's a caregiver, father or otherwise, or you know someone that is, someone that you love especially, I want to encourage you to join us for our men's group known as The Den. We meet bi weekly on Zoom, and we always tell everyone that we can go as deep or as shallow as you may want with regard to anything that you want to talk about. It really is just a secure place for men who are caregivers to come together, remind each other that we're not alone. There are a plethora of opportunities out there for women who are caregivers. And as far as I'm concerned, You can never have too many of them. But the fact is, there are two things at play. There are less options available for men, and as men, we're not usually as willing to be open or vulnerable. And so, to be able to create a safe space for us to do that, that's something that we decided to do as we saw that those opportunities are far and few for men. And it's not a therapy session. Like I said, there are some people that show up every couple weeks. There's some people that show up every couple months. There's some people that do not miss. And we have members anywhere from here in Southern California, Mexico City, the East Coast, and in between. So the registration is free, and the link to do so will be found in the show notes as well. So let's jump right into it. I didn't hear a lot of conversation from people that I know, fellow caregivers, talking about the this historic um, event or investment, and I found myself hmm, coming to grips with. I'm not a skeptic. Um, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I did begin to think that $2.4 billion to special education, that sounds fantastic. And the first thing I wondered was one of the first things was, where is that money going to go? How is it going to be spent? And is there anything that is going to get in the way of it being allocated as intended, specifically for special education? And what happens when Governor Newsom leaves office? I don't know what those um, answers are. But what it did is put a brief together that will examine the historic investment and its purpose, and figure out, will the investment improve the lives of children with disabilities and their families. We'll go over exactly what it is as well. We're going to try and separate facts from assumptions and promises from implementation, and then looking at the funding, separating the funding from the outcomes. Now, I don't know if I should say unfortunately, but factually, we don't know some of these answers until time is allowed to do its thing. Because you can have the best intention and have everything laid out, but a lot of the stuff we won't really know until the years go by and we see what kind of um, outcome there is long term, and or what the legs are, as they say. So, first thing we'll take a look at is in sharing this information. Okay, the first thing is, you begin to wonder, for those of you that are not in Southern California or in California, the question becomes, how does this, can it impact other states? Will it serve as a model? Other states don't have the same economic makeup or ratio that California does, so that answer is going to vary again. And like I said, time will really tell what these answers are. But the fact is, California is home to more students than any other state. Okay, there are many people that move here to California in order to take advantage of, take advantage of the free benefits and services that are available for those with disabilities. Compared to the rest of the country, the state is very, very progressive, and I'm very thankful that we happen to be here to be able to take advantage of those things as it relates to our son, who is 20 years old and was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3. But I never stopped to think about the fact that um, there's 800,000 students here. That says a lot, because, and that's just, that's California as a whole. It also happens to have, I think it's the second largest school district in the country, in Los Angeles Unified. That's a lot. So with 800,000 students needing special education services specifically, not just 800,000 students, it's significantly more than that, but 800,000 students in the state that need special education services, making California's special education system one of the largest in the world, not the country. So every dollar invested or not invested affects the following things: children, parents, teachers, therapists, school districts, taxpayers, future employers, and communities as a whole. And so the announcement was made um, this month in July, where Gavin Newsom signed the education budget. One provision that immediately did make national headlines is the um, bill that we're talking about, which is that California has committed $2.4 billion towards K through 12 special education. That is a 43% increase over their prior year. State officials describe it as the largest investment in special education in California history. I'd be curious to know how that compares to other states over history. So, looking at what Governor Newsom has stated, the goals include greater equity, increased support, more consistent funding, and better educational outcomes, as well as stronger accountability. In our history, my wife and I, in advocating for our son, we've experienced minimal pushback from the school district, the school district that he's been in, and any issues that have come up have been handled in an appropriate and effective manner. I did have one instance where we started a parents group that was able to, through meeting with our local district over time, get a an autism program at the middle school level. They did not have that at that level at that time. It was only in the uh, gosh, I guess that would be primary or just before elementary. There wasn't anything like that at the elementary level. There was at the high school, but not in between. And we were able to do that. Other than that, I haven't had a need to really push back like a whole lot, even though we've always been prepared for that kind of thing. But I've also not taken for granted that, that doesn't mean that it can't change, on a dime for anyone. And I know many other people, um, quite a few, even in the same district, that did in fact have issues. So the administration has also emphasized that the funding will equalize the per student special education rate statewide. So that means the amount of funds that are put aside per student statewide, increasing it to approximately, and it's interesting how I don't know why they have an approximation as opposed to a solid figure, but the approximate amount is $1,340 per student. So local education agencies receive funding at the same rate. So I think there's two things to consider. There's the increase, and then there's the intent to have it um, the same all across the board, meaning the funding rate. Um, I would imagine that then means that for years it hasn't been, which is, you can imagine, that's probably an interesting dilemma unto itself. So let's look at why it's historic as opposed to just the amount. It's the largest increase in the state for special education funding. It's a major increase statewide for K through 12. And then part of the broader education budget is totaling 151.4 billion. That's the highest level of um, PK through 12 funding in the state's history. So the bigger question is, money alone doesn't change lives. So obviously, if you've got that much that is earmarked to improve lives, you need to have a plan in place that is going to put the money in the or spent in the right areas, or to address the areas that will give the greatest improvement in terms of quality of life. But that's where the implementation comes in. So that it's more than just the dollars. So it leads to the central question of the episode: is what happens after the press conference? And it's interesting. I need to look it up. I didn't see the press conference myself. I just heard, I saw it on social media, and right away, someone that I know made a post asking a question that I'll end the show with, um, which is kind of, interesting to see what you would do with that money if it was completely up to you. There's a whole bunch of different answers I'm sure people will have, but we'll touch on that at the end of the show. But what we're going to try and answer best is, where will the money actually go? Will classrooms notice? Will parents notice? Will children receive better services? Will teachers' shortages improve? And will speech therapy improve? Will occupational therapy improve? Transition programs? And then how will taxpayers know whether the money was well spent? That's something that we plan to keep an eye on going forth, um, because this isn't something that is, comes about today and then it just goes away. There's a certain amount of accountability that has to take place also, which they said would. So let's look at why families are both hopeful and skeptical. I think that's the best way to describe it, because when I saw that number, I thought, gosh, that's quite a bit of money. That's that's promising. But I found myself facing two different things. The fact that I don't even know if I should say skeptical, but cautious and had questions. And then at the same time, I was trying to figure out why I was thinking that, because I'm generally an optimistic person. But you know, I don't know. I think maybe it's just a matter of, I'm still trying to figure that out myself, because again, like I said, our experience has been pretty great with regard to school districts for our son's entire scholastic experience. But people have experienced delayed services, shortages of teachers, insufficient aides, long assessment wait times, inconsistent implementation, and funding that never seemed to reach the classrooms. We did have one instance, but it wasn't really limited to the district. It was a teacher that, we just, a kind person, but seemed like maybe they had been teaching too long, or maybe they were tired of it, because it was more of a personal thing. That's the only thing I can say. It was a situation where the teacher was never directly rude, but the communication was such that, um, if we weren't as secure as we were as parents, we might feel that our son was more of a, I don't know, a burden or inconvenience, so to speak, and we had never experienced that before. But if that's your biggest concern and it's been addressed, then life is good. But despite that, like I said, I just found myself questioning, okay, how is this all going to work out? So, because of the experiences that I mentioned, which some other families have gone through, many families celebrate the investment, while at the same time simultaneously asking, you know, will it actually be different? And I guess that's the question that it really comes down to: is how is this going to be different? Will we feel this, or will it be a situation where people forget that that much amount of money has been put aside specifically for the purpose anyway? And hopefully that doesn't take place. But the episode is not about Governor Newsom. What it is about children, families, educators, therapists, caregivers, and future adults with disabilities. So that's what it really comes down to. It's really about us and our community. And so the perspective that I hope to bring is that, one of the greatest mistakes that we can make as a society is assuming that spending money automatically solves problems. Everything is about implementation and discipline, and sometimes it solves problems, sometimes it doesn't. And the real question is how much money was appropriated. Um, but yet, an even better one would be, what measurable difference will it make in the life of a child? And there was one of the things that I mentioned earlier, just a minute ago, where I talked about adults. These children with disabilities in school now will become adults with disabilities. And you have to wonder how much the implementation of this plan will improve their lives at that point in time later on. In other words, are there benefits that are going to exceed their experience in school? I would say that if the money is spent right, it should serve them now and have benefits that take place after they're finished with high school as well. So if California spends another 2.4 billion, what should the success look like? That's the other thing. We should be asking questions like, again, will we have shorter waiting lists, better inclusion, better employment outcomes. And again, how will we know whether we've achieved it? I don't know if they've provided an answer as to what that looks like. That's something that I'll cover in a future episode as well. What would success look like? What would it look like for this program to be successful, other than just as quickly as possible having better services and access to care and things of that nature? So, looking at my personal insight, um, like I said, I don't think parents wake up in the morning, asking whether Sacramento spent another $2 billion. So again, the information sounds great. $2 billion, okay, it's great. But what most parents are thinking is, will my child receive speech therapy this month? Will they have the aid that they need, or will there be a fight? Will they finally receive the services that are promised in the IEP? Will the IEP be a little bit more of a friendly experience and not adversarial? And ultimately, I think that's how the success should be measured. Like I said, I will cover in future episodes, or in a future episode, what the success would look like, um, what I think it should probably look like. But the people who will determine what that looks like, or will determine whether or not it's actually taking place, are the families that have children in need of these services now and will for the coming years. And especially those that are younger, because there's a longer period of time and a sample size when they graduate high school to answer the following question, which is, were our lives improved in terms of the quality of service and benefits and needs that our child had? So what remains uncertain is, again, how effectively the funds are going to be used. Those are the things that we're trying to figure out. And like I said, time really tells that. So where's the money actually going? So we're going to try and separate the headlines from reality. So when the average person hears that California has invested 2.4 billion in special education, again, the first thought is, okay, that's great, but exactly what does that mean? So is California writing every school district a check? The answer is no. The money is not being divided equally among school districts. So that's the first thing that we've um, uncovered here. Instead, what the state is going to do is distribute special education funding through its statewide funding formula. That formula is known as LEA, which is Local Education Agencies. It includes school districts, county offices of education, and charter schools, which receive funding based on the state's special education funding model. Now, with the new legislation increasing the statewide base rate and then equalizing the funding. So each LEA then decides how to use those funds within state and federal requirements. So, as you can imagine, with a state as big as California, it's one thing to, again, come up with an amount that is that large, but it's a great challenge to be able to administer um, those dollars where the biggest change can take place. Especially when, as I just mentioned, each local education agency will decide how to use the funds within the state and federal requirements. So the other thing we will be following up on is, okay, each agency determines it. What is that process? How do they determine that? And is it the same for each agency? So to me, that leaves the room open for certain areas seeing an improvement where others might not. If it's not the same, that seems like it could be a logical problem. So the money is intended to support students with disabilities, not to create separate cash payments for every child. I'm not sure why anybody would think that anyway. But for a discussion point, let's say your child has an IEP. The state just gave my child more money. That's what some people may think, and that's not necessarily. I shouldn't say not necessarily. That is not how the actual funding works. So the dollars flow to educational agencies, as we mentioned, which each decides how that's spent. So, when the next question would be, what is the state trying to accomplish? According to what the state officials have stated, the major goals are as follows: increasing equity among districts, providing more predictable funding, helping districts hire and retain qualified staff, improving educational outcomes, expanding, access to services, and then supporting students in the least restrictive environment whenever appropriate. Again, on one hand, this is great news, but I see twice as many questions that come about. The first thing I thought of when I saw supporting students in the least restrictive environment whenever appropriate. Who determines when that's appropriate? How do you determine when that's appropriate? Um, a least restrictive environment, I'm sure each case is going to be different as well, but there's got to be a couple things that everybody should be entitled to. So it'll be interesting to see what the answer is to that. The next question that I thought of, which would be, where could the money actually be spent? So there's a variety of potential areas. One would be teachers, because if you're looking at more credential special education teachers, you want to reduce vacancies, reduce burnout, and then improve retention. Because people that choose this path to work in special education, usually very, very selfless individuals. It's not something that anybody does to get rich. You give up a bit of yourself getting training and credentials to be even to be able to do that. And as we know, teachers are very underpaid and undervalued, and that's teacher. I'm referring to teachers then that are teaching neurotypical children or the general population. When it comes to special education, it takes even more to be there for our children. So um, paraeducator, paraeducators, such as instructional aides, one-on-ones, behavioral assistance, and classroom support. That's another area that we're hoping that the funds would be geared towards. And then the related services, such as speech, the various forms of therapy, speech, occupational, physical therapy, behavioral intervention, psychological services, counseling, and then adaptive physical education. Um, I don't know how many schools have some a line or difference between the physical education that is had for general ed versus those in special education. I know in areas where the availability or funding is a challenge, you may simply have all kids in one class, depending on the level of disability that one may have. And then the other areas that would be affected or an area of focus would be assessments. So reducing waiting periods, because in some schools, depending on the number of students, you have a long waiting period in order for an assessment to take place. Um, you imagine when you send your child to school and it has not yet been established that there's a disability and there is no diagnosis. There's a little bit of a challenge on your hands to get an assessment done and get to the point of a diagnosis, because the diagnosis will then dictate what benefits you're entitled to. So, looking at also providing faster evaluations, earlier identification, and then earlier intervention. This is These are the areas that the hope is, where those funds are going to go or be focused on. So then transition services, programs that prepare students for employment. That's huge, because when your child graduates high school, our son is in a program, an adult program now, since he graduated high school 2 years ago. Man, it goes by so fast. And it's been an adjustment, and we feel as though he's getting the services, that he needs. And again, like I said, our experience has been um, good, but that's the part of caregiving that you don't necessarily always talk about or can be forgotten. There's a little bit of respite one might get from the actual physical caregiving when your child is in school or away from home for a portion of the day. But the other part of that is staying on top of the communication with the school to make sure that they're getting what they need. Sometimes the respite is so important, or such a relief when your child goes to school, that you can forget about the other things that you need to follow up on, just because you're able to take a little bit of a breather. And for some people, they are collecting IHSS maybe Social Security, and work minimally because the level of dependence is so high because of the disability. And in a case where one is a single parent, that compounds considerably. And then your own well being gets put at risk. So, with regard to what takes place after high school, what you would hope to prepare your child for with the proper funding and allocation of the funds is independent living, college for those who might go, vocational training, community integration, and then transition programs for those who are 18 to 22. That defines the program that our son is in. And it's funny because I'm looking at college and vocational training and community integration. We go back and forth between the feeling that hmm, that he's not, I shouldn't say that he's not going to, but that he may not do those things versus we never really know. You don't know. Anything is possible. And we try to lean a little bit more towards anything is possible, but it's difficult to find out exactly what his level of independence is going to be on his own. But we're making progress on a daily basis, and it's encouraging to know that these funds are there and that an opportunity is there, uh, at least in thought and in spirit. But like I said, time will tell in terms of what really takes place. So the other areas of focus are professional development. So teacher training, like anything else, you have a set of rules that you adhere to in accredited situations. But the industry continues to grow and change. So there may be certain ways of thinking with regard to um, the manner in which one teaches or a therapy of some kind. Over time, that changes. And being able to have funds that go towards teacher training will allow people to keep up with those changes as they take place within the industry. So you're looking at autism supports, behavior management, assistive technology, and then inclusive education. And I think that portion is huge too, because if you have a school that or an environment where there are both neurotypical and neurodiverse children, you can't always assume that there are lessons being given at home to the neurotypical that would foster inclusion. We like to hope so, but you don't really know. So having funds put aside to include that as a measure helps as well. And then the assistive technology, communication devices, learning technology, adaptive software, and then classroom accommodations. Then when it comes to mental health supports, they're talking about counseling, behavior specialists, and school psychologists, as well as family supports. I think the family supports is something that's very huge because you need to be able to encourage people that there's a village um, of support for them, especially let's say there's either a language barrier or a single parent. Anything that makes it more of a challenge to get to the things that everyone needs. And then looking at transportation, um, accessibility you would expect, but one of the things here that surprises me pleasantly is route improvements. So I would imagine that would mean either a safer route or a shorter route. Those are things that are great to think about as well. And then in terms of inclusion, excuse me, the idea is to expand opportunities for students with disabilities to practice in general education settings when appropriate. And I guess I would imagine the level of um, um, appropriateness or knowing what is appropriate is determined by the the disability for each person. So the questions are also, if you were given part of the funding, where would you spend it first? And that's what I'm hoping to hear from some of you. I'm just curious. So another question is then, does this mean every child will receive better services? You would hope so, but not necessarily. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions about it. The legislation provides resources. It doesn't guarantee identical outcomes across every district. And that goes back to my question again, which is that if within each district you have these agencies that determine how it's going to be spent, they're not all on the same page. It's done differently. That's why no matter how much money is put aside for funding, we need to make sure that we are our children's advocate and be prepared to uh, fight for them, even if that means getting legal representation to do so. So some districts already have strong programs, and others face severe staffing shortages. And some may improve quickly. There are others that are going to take years. And so, with that being a reality, that goes back to what I was saying before, and that we'll find out what this really looks like over time. With regard to my professional insight, as someone that works in financial services and a caregiver and unites the two, helping families find solutions and building a bridge between prosperity and their hopes and dreams. Like I said, money creates opportunities, great, but then leadership determines the results. And this isn't meant to be a political discussion, but there's this is where the challenge comes in because there's a certain amount of things that are going to be achievable or achieved as a result of Governor Newsom's actions or lack thereof. And then the same will apply to his successor and their actions or lack thereof. And so that's part of the reasons why, only time will really tell us what this will ultimately really look like. So, question number 5: how will families know if the investment is working? Everybody's situation is going to be different. Like I said, time will really tell. That's the most important question in the entire episode. So, some of the possible indicators would be shorter assessment timelines, fewer vacancies, and then more therapy sessions, regardless of what kind of therapy you're getting. So, we're going to be taking a look at when these things are supposed to be implemented. And what I'd like to do is, I'd love to hear from um, any of our audience that is in California here that can talk about what differences they may have seen over time. We're going to come back later on with another episode to try and um, address that and reach out on social media and try and find out from you what kind of changes you might see. So the other thing that we're hoping will take place is reduce caseloads, improving graduation rates, and then better transition outcomes, higher parent satisfaction, and fewer due process complaints. That's very self-serving, but as it relates to a district, but I understand. Improving reading, improving attendance, greater inclusion, and students leaving school simply better prepared for adult life. Again, going back to time doing its thing. So the question becomes, if California spends another 2.4 billion, what should taxpayers expect in return? Hmm. So could it be a game changer? Yes, potentially. The investment has the potential to improve special education in a bunch of meaningful ways. However, the funding alone has never guaranteed success. So, as I mentioned before, any kind of real change is going to depend on, unfortunately, it's going to depend on who's in office, who's going to uphold it. So, that means the implementation, the leadership, the accountability, the workforce availability, partnership with families, and the continuous improvement. There's a lot of moving parts to make this a success long term. So history teaches us something important, which is that many excellent ideas have failed because they were poorly implemented. Some modest investments have performed um, well and transformed lives, but were implemented exceptionally well. So the question isn't whether or not enough is being spent. The question is, will it be spent wisely? And um, what are the challenges that still exist? Well, even with historic funding, California continues to face significant challenges. We do. And among them are the things that we're hoping that this bill would address, which is teacher shortages, high turnover, all a product of burnout, rising student needs. Um, if you think about the world that we live in and the way it continues to change and evolve and the chaos that's taking place, it's got to be a heck of a challenge to be a teacher in this day and age, just as it would to be a parent of a child that is, say, in middle school or maybe a little younger, um, just with social media and everything. So regional disparities, recruiting of qualified therapists, balancing inclusion with individualized supports, and then maintaining consistency across hundreds of districts are just some of the problems that the state of California faces with regard to special education. So, if you look at the questions that every parent should ask at their next IEP, this should be helpful. So, there's a couple questions you should ask. Has the district received additional resources as a result of the new funding? So, rather than just wait to see what change looks like, those of us who are parents and still have IEPs can sort of almost track the uh, change or maybe even affect it if enough of us are asking the following questions. Have staff levels change? Are there plans to reduce caseloads? Will my child's services change? Will evaluations happen more quickly? Are additional therapies being added? And a lot of these questions are about what is going to take place. After a period of time, say over the next year or so, the questions can always be, have these things changed? As opposed to, are there plans to reduce the caseloads? Have the caseloads been reduced? How is the district measuring the success? I'm asking these questions as a parent, but you, district representative or teacher or counselor or whoever I'm in the IEP with, you tell me, have you seen any measurable change since this bill was put into place? And how can families participate in shaping how those services are improved? Those are the people to ask those questions of. So school board members should be asking, how much is the district receiving? How will the dollars be allocated? How will we measure the outcomes? What does success look like from year to year? What does it look like 3 years from now? What does it look like 5 years from now? So the key takeaways are, the expectations are high, and they should be with that much money. But the real measure of success will never be the size of the appropriation. The measure of success will be the lives of the children. Um, Parents don't experience budgets, right? We don't experience budgets. We experience the effect of the budget. We experience teachers, IEPs, therapists, classrooms, communication, support, hope. That's where the investment will ultimately succeed or fail. So it's like at the end of the day, the end of any given day, the end of a month, the end of a school year, how do you feel about your child's experience in school? How do you feel about the level of support that you have? And those are the things that are worth paying attention to determine what kind of changes are being made here. Um, we looked at where the money is intended to go. Now let's examine the bigger conversation. Supporters believe the investment could transform special education across California. Granted, there's others that are cautiously optimistic and want to see measurable results before declaring any kind of victory or success. But on the next session, and what we're going to do real quick is examine both perspectives, explore the legitimate concerns, and then discuss what accountability should look like um, over time. And so, whether the parent agrees on the amount, few would argue that students with disabilities are going to require and do require significant resources. The investment sends an important message. So, um, the first benefit is, again, like I said, greater equity. The opportunity to address staffing shortages is another one altogether. And then um, better early intervention and better transition for services. Those are the things that are supposed to take place. Those are the things that we hope will take place, and they should on paper. Um, you know, the final reflection just before we close is, I'd like to leave you with a final question, which is, let's see, imagine we're sitting together 5 years from today, and this is how the success of this program is ultimately going to be determined. Everybody has a different um, peer view, so to speak, right? what would success look like for you as a parent in order for this program to be effective? Would it be another press conference, another budget announcement? Um, it's probably not going to be that. It's going to be everything that I just asked with regard to what you feel at the end of a given day. Um, and it's probably going to be, that your child received the support that they needed. A teacher saying that they finally have the resources that they need. Differences that are tangible, that you can see. And sometimes they're so busy caregiving that you don't see those things, which is why I said it's a good idea to ask those things in the IEP or any communication that you may have with the school. So, in preparing for the episode, I found myself thinking about the size of the investment, um, and the lives behind the numbers. Every statistic represents a child. Every budget line represents a family. Every policy decision shapes someone's life. And if the investment creates more opportunities for all those things to take place, then it's successful. So we get to decide that collectively in our own situation as to what seems successful to us. Um, I'm hoping that that is exactly what takes place. But just wanted to take some time to jump into that and share what I was able to find out. It'll be an ongoing conversation because it's one that will continue to evolve, obviously. And to everyone within the sound of my voice, I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in. Again, I want to thank our community partners, Billy Footwear, Soul Grain, and Neat Beat. Again, if you check on the link in the show notes, you can get 10% off your final purchase with each one of these fantastic businesses. And again, I want to encourage you to, if you or someone you know is a male caregiver, invite you to join us for our bi-weekly group known as the Den. The link will be in the show notes as well. It is free of charge. And just remember that everybody has the same needs. We all need to be seen, need to be heard, need to be loved, need to know that we matter. And thank you for supporting us. And as we continue to grow and evolve, if you're listening, watching, wherever you might be, whatever platform you're hearing this on, we thank you. I want to thank the women in my life without whom I would be nothing. That's my wife, Laura, and my mom, Jan. Thank you so much. Thank you for supporting the show, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Spectrum. And if you're watching this, wherever you are, we love you.